The past few years have been a treat to anyone who loves playing CRPGs. Kickstarter has opened up the ability for this relatively niche genre to come to life. Most notably, Divinity Original Sin 2 has had some serious critical acclaim from a lot of outlets. This lit a fire in me to go back and try the game that came before it, Divinity Original Sin. Now, I tried getting into Divinity around the time it came out a year or two ago, but after having played for 15 hours, I felt off about a lot of the gameplay decisions that the game had. With a few years having been passed and a fresh set of eyes, do I still feel the same way? Let's find out. So let's start with what I did like about the game. Man, oh man, the elements system. What do I mean by that? Let me elaborate. Simply put, each element in the game, such as fire, water, oil, etc., behaves how you would expect it would. Water puts out fires, fire makes people hot, and so on and so forth. Now, this may sound basic, but when all of these elements come together and interact, it makes the game an absolute joy to play. The system made a huge impression on me very early on in my playthrough. As I walked into the game's first major city with my two player-made characters, I headed over to the docks where a ship had caught fire. One of the characters I created happened to have the ability to summon rain, so I figured I'd try to use the spell on the burning ship. And well, what do you know, it put out the fire. All this was done without me being prompted by dialogue or being prodded into this interaction by the developers in any way. This moment of player-driven interaction absolutely captivated me. It made me feel like the developers didn't give me a binary decision to make, but instead gave me a bunch of tools and a world to use them in. Now let's take a look at what the moment-to-moment gameplay is like, shall we? Divinity, like many in its genre, is not afraid to take its time. You'll be spending a lot of time walking around towns, interacting with the game's many NPCs, as well as exploring caves and dungeons. As you might expect, you'll be encountering a lot of enemies in these caves and dungeons, which brings us to the game's combat system. Original Sin uses a turn-based combat system driven by action points, or AP. This AP is a resource that fuels all of the actions you can take in a turn. Movement, spells, attacks, items, anything. Any unspent AP you have spills over into the next turn. Now, this isn't exactly a Fire Emblem style turn system where each player takes a turn and moves all of his troops, but instead, turns are done on a character by character basis depending on how fast each of those individual characters is. The formerly mentioned element system plays a huge role in the game's combat as well. See a group of orcs standing in a puddle? Shock that puddle with a lightning spell and laugh as they all get stunned. Your party near a bunch of noxious gas clouds? Be careful using fire spells because you can set that entire thing ablaze. Interactions like this permeate every combat encounter. Never have I felt more required to pay attention to my surroundings in a battle. You can't just build a solid party and let the characters play themselves. No. Each encounter you have to actively be thinking about positioning of every unit and how it relates to the terrain. This also makes it so that each fight plays out radically differently, which is a stark contrast to, say, Pillars of Eternity. Pillars had some limited interactions such as this, but nowhere near the same scale, which means more or less every fight I had in that game played out the exact same way. I hold that Divinity is the clear winner in the combat department. There's also some really satisfying progression in the game. You'll be acquiring some sweet loot at a really steady rate, and a lot of the gear is far more than just stat sticks. Any piece of loot that carries an elemental property especially is something you want to think about. I was really not careful enough with my fire wand. In addition to gear, the game has the stat and talent system you'd come to expect from an RPG, but a lot of these talents are really interesting decisions instead of just pure upsides. One of the coolest looking ones was Zombie, which makes poisons heal you and heals damage you. Sadly, this is where my praise of Divinity comes to an end. A lot of the frustrations I encountered stem from this game's absolute need to cling to old school CRPG mechanics. This is made incredibly apparent by how the game handles healing. There is no automatic out of combat healing. You have to head back to an inn and find a bed to sleep in. Now look guys, I get it. They want to make it so that going out into dungeons is an adventure that you need to prepare for, right? You should bring bandages and potions and stuff like that. Well, here's the problem with that line of thinking. Healing spells are unlimited and only gated by time out of combat. The end result of this is that after every single encounter I had in the game, I would sit around and wait for my healer's healing spells to come back up and cast them over and over and over again to top off my party. If this is an option to me, then there's no reason why out-of-combat healing shouldn't just be automatic if you have a healer in your party. Now, I'm sure many will love this design decision. I can already foresee being told to get good in the comments right now. And, that's okay. But man, the requirement to sit around for a few minutes and do nothing after every single fight I had in the entire game drove me absolutely mad. Now, the only thing worse than having to sit around for healing out of combat is, God forbid, you let a party member die. I hope you have a resurrect scroll, friend, because barring a late-game witchcraft spell, that's the only way you're bringing your party members back. And no, I'm not just talking about out in combat or adventuring, I mean period. There's no church back in town to revive party members or anything like that. You'll have to hope the magic vendors in town have resurrect scrolls in stock, which they carry in limited supply. More than once I found myself in a position where all but one of my party members died and I was flat broke. I didn't have any money to buy a resurrect scroll to bring my party back, and I didn't have the ability to go out and quest to get gold because, well, I didn't have a party. Too often I was forced into a position where reloading an old save was the most preferable option, which is a shame because I usually like to roll with the punches in situations like that. Speaking of questing, let's talk a little bit about the quest log, shall we? It's horrible. Don't expect any hand-holding or quest markers here, boys. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think quest markers are necessary. Hell, Morrowind is one of my favorite RPGs, and it did just fine without them, right? But Morrowind also had a super in-depth quest log that properly cataloged everything about the quest. Divinity often left me with absolutely no information on what to do next. Now, this could be somewhat defendable if the angle was to make you feel like a sleuth to try to suss out information on the next step of your quest, but if that were the case, it's absolutely indefensible that the quest log doesn't properly keep track of events that already happened. Notable sections of quests just seem to get glossed over or ignored in the quest log, not to mention it's visually unappealing and an absolute nightmare to sort through, especially with the gargantuan amount of quests you're going to be undertaking in this game. Now, if you're a completionist who wants to complete every quest, know that this is pretty much impossible. I'm not referring to how long it would take you, no. Depending on your actions, some quests can be completely cut off from you. You can kill anyone you want to in the game, which is a super awesome level of freedom to have, but the quest system is definitely not prepared to handle this level of freedom. I'm going to be talking about one early game quest in particular, so minor spoiler alert if you don't want to hear about the romance between Unsinkable Sam and Maxine. Now, Sam was in love with the mayor's cat, Maxine, but was sadly just a tavern cat who had no chance of landing this regal feline. That is until I was able to track down his special collar, which showed that Sam was at one point indeed a cat of status. Now, before I was able to deliver this collar to Sam, there was a little incident at the mayor's house. As part of an ongoing murder investigation, I snuck into the mayor's office to find some clues, and alas, I was caught. And things got bloody, and poor Maxine got stuck in the crossfire and was killed that day. Later on, I went over to Sam to break the news, and strangely, I didn't have any dialogue options to convey the fact that I just murdered his beloved. Instead, I gave him the collar, and he ran running over to the mayor's office gleefully to show it off to Maxine. When he arrived, he stood over Maxine's body in a perpetual bug-like state, purely having his script broken because of how things went about. I tried clicking on Sam to talk to him, but nothing happened. Now, situations like this happened multiple other times throughout my playthrough, so I didn't just run into some one-off bug. This is a flaw with the game fundamentally, that some parts of it just can't handle the level of freedom it's giving you. If killing Maxine literally breaks the game, don't let me kill Maxine. Now that we've gone over my qualms with Divinity's gameplay, let's move into the other aspect that all good RPGs need, writing. Well, here we go, guys. The writing in Divinity Original Sin is freaking garbage. Let me make this clear. I don't dislike light writing, okay? Not everything needs to be super dark and heavy to satisfy me, right? But the writing here, it's just super meme-worthy, guys. And the voice acting doesn't help much either. Now, yes, you heard me right, voice acting. This game is fully voiced, which sounds like a super sweet thing at first, until you realize that Larian just got a bunch of developers to voice all the lines for them. Now, that was a joke, but honestly, I would not be surprised if it were true, just grabbing random people around the office to get the voice lines. Divinity never captured me because of this. The world, the characters, the stories, none of it was compelling. Now, what was compelling was how intricately all of these stories were integrated. One seemingly unrelated side quest may prove to be part of the greater narrative in a way you didn't expect. And moments like these always put a smile on my face. It's just a shame that I was never hooked with any other aspect of the story like I was with, say, Pillars of Eternity. Now, I'm sorry if I'm comparing this game to Pillars so much. They're both CRPG Kickstarter darlings that came out at around the same time, and I really loved one, and I really didn't like the other one. Seriously, guys, Durance, Adair, and Zawa were 3 of my favorite RPG characters of all time. Who is there to love in Divinity? Seriously. Oh, also, as you can see by the portraits on screen, Pillars has better art, too. Divinity sacrifices the beautiful painting-like backdrops of its competitors and replaces it with a fully 3D world with a cartoony aesthetic. Now, whether this is a good thing is more dependent on your taste than anything else, but with how heavily the environment is integrated into Divinity's gameplay, it'd be near impossible to make it work with static painted backgrounds. If you like this type of game, you'll probably really like Divinity. If you don't, I'm pretty sure it's not going to captivate you. Now, I tried, guys. I really tried to sink my teeth into this game on multiple occasions. It's just not for me. And I'm sure there are a lot of you out there who are going to feel the same way that I did.